Thanks to Harold Meyerson last week for being here without Adam Serwer. That was great. Thanks for him taking giving me a little break. But I am back, and this week I am with our senior editor, Gabrielle Gurley. Thank you for being here, Gabrielle.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having me here.
Absolutely. So I want to get to a bunch of stuff, but there's been a little bit of breaking news, and maybe we can break it down together as far as this government funding situation is concerned. So the story is that the House earlier this week, passed a continuing resolution to fund the government. It's not really a continuing resolution in the usual sense because it actually cuts a bunch of spending. Usually, a continuing resolution keeps spending constant. It cuts a bunch of non-discretionary or non-defense discretionary spending. It adds spending to defense. It adds spending to deportation. It takes about $1 billion out of the DC budget, which I know you are aware of. And it because it doesn't have specific components of where the spending needs to go, it gives Donald Trump carte blanche, really, to move spending around, cut spending where he wants to, add it to other areas. And I think it could be really damaging for these lawsuits around impoundment, actually, because Congress is sort of giving its approval to move this spending around. So the House passed that with all, except for one, except for Jared Golden of Maine, all Republican votes. And there was a sense that Republicans can't do that, that House Republicans can't get it together to pass a party line spending bill. But they did. This is a new reality where Trump can whip everybody in line, right? And so it came to the Senate, and Chuck Schumer decides to cave. He went on the Senate floor last night and said shutdown would be worse. The cure would be worse than the disease, I guess. And so I'm going to agree to this very partisan, very unilateral Republican bill. So the expectation was he had a bunch of votes in his pocket so that he can pass that, because you were going to need Democratic votes in the Senate in order to pass this bill. It's there's a 60 vote threshold. Rand Paul, I'm told, is not going to vote for this bill. So you need 8 Democrats. I got a list. A bunch of us got a list of who those 8 Democrats were likely to be. One of them was the retiring Senator Gary Peters of Michigan. Just a few minutes ago, he came out and said he's a no on cloture. At the same time, Nancy Pelosi released a statement basically condemning Schumer, not in name. She didn't use his actual name, but she said this is a false choice.
The point was clear.
The point was very clear.
Sure.
This is a false choice. And she said specifically, listen to the women. And when she said women, she meant the 2 heads, Democratic leaders on the appropriations committees, Rosa DeLauro in the House from Connecticut, and Patty Murray from Washington State in the Senate. And that, they should follow. Apparently, the House members across the political, ideological spectrum are apoplectic at this.
Yes.
They all walked the plank. They all decided on this strategy. And to see Schumer just casually blow it up while admitting that it's a terrible bill and saying, no, we can't have a shutdown when we're effectively in a shutdown right now. It is, it's really inspired a lot of anger and frustration, including from people who are like really moderate people in the caucus.
Well, what do you make his argument that the reason he's doing this is to prevent Elon Musk, from running amok? What do you make of that?
Doing that right now?
But he would be even more emboldened. I don't know how much more
what
emboldened
would
he
be the
could be.
difference? How how could Elon be more emboldened than he is currently in
Mm,
terms of violating the law, shutting down entire agencies without any kind of congressional approval, cutting spending that was duly appropriated by Congress. The Fox News came out yesterday with a piece
right.
almost right after the Schumer made his decision that said uh, Republicans and the Trump White House are devising how they're going to impound spending from this continuing resolution. So this continuing resolution isn't worth the piece of paper it's printed on. I mean, it's not a thing. It's just something that's going to be abused again. And so the idea that no, we can't let Elon Musk run roughshod over everything when he's already doing
Already
that.
doing it.
And it seems to me, and I know you've written about this actually, is that the divide in the Democratic Party, a lot of people think it's about ideology. A lot of people think it's about left versus center. It's actually about willingness and eagerness to fight versus
Right.
not.
And
And Schumer is on the wrong side of this.
Schumer is definitely on the wrong side of history. And if Nancy Pelosi has come out and called him on it, not to mention all the other bright light names we know, AOC, John Ossoff on,
Yeah.
in
Ossoff,
Georgia.
who's probably the toughest race
Mm,
next year in the Senate,
mhm.
said that he is a no on cloture.
So for him, it is just the biggest historical mistake. Obviously, we're in this tactical situation right now, but history will not look kindly,
Yeah.
depending on who writes it. History will not look kindly on this hesitation in, putting up some sort of roadblock, some sort of resistance to what is an unprecedented um, usurpation of democratic power in the United States.
I mean, if you think about the history of sort of authoritarianism, when has it ever been the case that tactically retreating in the face of authoritarianism leads to less authoritarianism? I mean,
Yeah,
that
it's
that is not a thing that happens. The Trump is out there boasting that Chuck Schumer did the right thing. Do
mm,
you really think that he's going to leave it at that?
exactly.
Usually it's a give an inch, take a mile situation.
Yeah, and for the Democrats possibly to be going along with this does not bode well for everything else that the Republicans claim. Trump has also come out and said Social Security is not at risk. Puts that at risk, you know.
Right. If you're not willing to have a shutdown, you're certainly not willing to mess with the debt limit.
Mm,
And everything else that Republicans can do, they can do by themselves. I mean,
yes.
reconciliation is a 50 vote situation in the Senate. So they can handle that on their own. The only area where there was some leverage was in a 60 vote environment like there is with this vote. And to say, I'll live the fight another day, who knows if that day is even going to come.
Yeah, that
Uh,
is that is the major question. Because
so we
everyone,
have a question here from John Darger. It says, does this enable Musk to override the judge who ordered that workers be returned to the government? I'll give some context. Yesterday, a federal judge, I think it was the second federal judge, ordered that all these probationary employees were illegally fired because they were not fired for cause. It was a reduction in force without using the reduction in force procedures,
Mhm.
and ordered all those probationary employees to be restored to their jobs. Now, in the face of that, they are trying to do these cuts the right way by, yesterday was a deadline for all federal agencies to give to the Office of Management and Budget a plan for reduction in force. So even if these probationary employees are restored and reinstated, it may be a prelude to a reduction in force done in a somewhat more legal manner, although not necessarily. I think there's going to be fights over the RIFs as well, but it might be a prelude to being fired again down the road. And if you're a federal employee, who was there and fired, and you're told, "Oh, come back," but you might be fired later. I mean, what do you really, do you want to get off that yo-yo? I guess is the question.
Oh, well, that's the question that everyone is asking, is that once the judges have made their rulings, are they going to be adhered to by the Trump administration?
Right.
What does the pushback from the Trump administration against very clear orders from federal judges look like? And once we head down that path, if Musk decides to defy federal
Yeah.
judges and the Trump administration backs him up, then we have really gone over a cliff.
Yeah. I mean, I think we're certainly seeing ways where they're trying to say not A, but B, not B, but C. They're trying to sort of shift around to get to what they want. It's defiance, but it's in sort of a squirrely kind of way where they're like,
Mm.
okay, we'll do reductions in force then. So I think that risk is certainly palpable. And we won't know specifically until we get to the Supreme Court on some of these matters, on the workforce matters. But really, I'm looking for that impoundment vote. If the Supreme Court says no, the Impoundment Control Act of 1974 is good law, and you cannot cut spending that has been appropriated by Congress.
Yeah, and that's very much
That's the question. What do they do then?
sure. And if they go
So
up against the Supreme Court, um,
yeah,
we're in bigger trouble than we already are.
we have another question from Deborah Nam Crane. What kind of exposure does Schumer have vis-a-vis crypto? I do not have the answer to that question, but what I will tell you, because I did write a little bit about crypto earlier this week, is that Democrats collaborated on a separate thing in the Senate Banking Committee this week, when I believe 5 of them voted with all Republicans on the first kind of return on investment, I would say, of the crypto industry, which spent hundreds of millions of dollars in the 2024 elections. This bill, it's called the Genius Act. It was co-sponsored by Kirsten Gillibrand. Genius is an acronym for something that I don't remember, but it's a bill to regulate stablecoins, which are these digital assets that are allegedly backed one-to-one by real assets, and they are pegged to the US dollar, so they act like dollars. And what they really are is a way to facilitate trading in crypto. There are a lot of things that are alleged that these particular items do, but what they actually, thank you very much. Lauren, our producer behind the scenes, has given me, it's the Guiding and Establishing National Innovation for U.S. Stablecoins Act. That's the Genius Act. But anyway, really what stablecoins do is they facilitate crypto trading, and what it could lead to is, because any not a financial or non-financial company can make a stablecoin under this new regulatory regime, it could lead to Meta or Amazon or even Elon Musk X making a stablecoin, making a private currency, essentially, without the regulatory protections of a bank deposit or a money market account. So that's the fear there. Okay, that's a complete tangent. But
Good tangent.
yeah, so I'm a little curious. I just want to wrap this up, and then I want to get to the Canada stuff. But I'm a little bit curious where this is going to go. So, when Pelosi speaks, a lot of people listen. You see, certainly the base of the party is still calling senators and trying to get them to put the brakes on this bill. Could there really? I like it. It almost expands my brain to think that there could be a revolt against Chuck Schumer in the U.S. Senate. Like it does not happen. That Democrats are rule followers, but could it be that Schumer completely misread the sentiment of Democrats in and outside of Washington so much that that something changes here?
Well, there are a lot of indicators that Schumer has deeply misread all of this. I mean, there are Republican representatives who are still going home to furious town halls. Just think of what will happen if the Senate goes along with this when senators have to go home and face constituents, when Democrats in the House have to go home and face
Mm-hmm.
constituents. I'm sure that calculus has to be going
Right.
through the minds of folks, um, particularly those members of Congress who are, or those members of the Senate who are for real,
Up for reelection, yeah.
for
Uh,
reelection.
well, I mean, funnily enough, a lot of the people who are tipped to be going along with the Schumer thing are going to vote for cloture are not up for reelection next year. But this will be the first week that that senators are off next week. It's their first recess since the inauguration. They've been working for 10 straight weeks, actually. And Chuck Schumer himself is going to be on a book tour next week that takes him around the country,
Very,
uh,
very bad time for a book tour.
including in Los Angeles next Sunday. And I believe I will be there.
Well, it will be
But
interesting if he decides to pursue that book tour.
right, or if
He
there's
doesn't, he doesn't want,
unscheduled cancellations, right?
exactly. I mean, you'll go from Tesla takedowns to Schumer smackdowns.
There you
If
go. Well,
if
it's funny. There's a Tesla protest in Santa Monica tomorrow, this weekend, and then next weekend Schumer shows up. So it'll be literally one into the other. But I'll say one more thing on this, and then we'll move on. Um, this gets a little bit technical, but there are actually two cloture votes on anything. You have to end debate to proceed to the bill, and you have to end debate to end debate on the bill. So there are two cloture votes to anything. Because of the way that the timing of when cloture votes have to happen and what time in between gets set up, any one senator could hold this off to Monday. It's just, I mean, trust me, like any one senator could hold this off to Monday where the anger and calling can build. So it'll be interesting to see if, if the whole caucus doesn't revolt, will a Bernie Sanders or somebody say, you know what, a weekend shutdown is not that big a deal. I'm holding this off to Monday to just let the public weigh in, get more, give more information to their senators, and we'll see what happens on Monday.
Well, that would be an interesting move because there is, and I don't know when the actual beginning of the march. I would imagine they're marching as we speak. The Veterans March,
Mm,
Washington, is today with related marches in 50 state capitals,
mm,
also marches over this weekend. So if the vote does not, materialize,
yeah,
what have you, definitely there will probably be an outpouring related to this to add on to everything else that people have been boiling up to.
yeah.
Uh,
And two other things. I know I keep putting on other things, but
yeah.
one, federal workers are against this. The largest union for federal workers, the American AFG, American Federation of Government Employees, um, they have put out a statement against the CR. So if the idea is we got to save federal workers from being furloughed, federal workers are actually against this. And number two, the consumer confidence survey from the University of Michigan came out today, and it's one of the largest and most precipitous drops in the history of the survey. Since December, there's been a 22% drop in consumer confidence. Even in the last month among Republicans, there's been a 10% drop. And consumer inflation expectations are up to 5% by next year, which is the largest inflation expectation since November of 2022. So, Trump, this comes at a time, Chuck Schumer is kind of acting like, well, Trump has all the cards and he's all powerful. This is coming at a time when consumers are very much souring on Donald Trump,
And
where his
Republican
approval
consumers
ratings
particularly, yes.
are going down. And the idea that he's invulnerable right now, and we got to wait until his approval ratings are down is ridiculous.
Yeah.
So,
Those who
okay,
see that have not been paying, they have not been paying a close attention to what's been going on with the Tesla revolt.
exactly.
I mean, eggs are the new barometer. Prices going
Right.
up. You've got measles outbreaks. There are lots of things that are cautionary signs as far as particularly Republican confidence in this administration.
Right. And if you look at all these town halls in Republican areas, deep
Town
red
halls,
areas,
deep red areas, the pushback in the deep red areas is frankly very interesting. There's a sentiment among Democrats that yeah, Republicans who voted for Trump didn't think it was going to affect them. And to some degree, I think
right?
that that is true, that it was going to affect undocumented people, Latinos, African Americans, women of color.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
Not
mm-hmm.
not us, the faithful Republican Trump supporters, but the administration has proved to be equal opportunity.
Yeah,
And the
that's
broadest,
right. That's right. Hey, good for
uh,
them.
yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, okay. Well, we've been talking about the impact of this Trump volatility on the U.S. electorate, but you, over the last several weeks, have been following the impact of this north of the border to our neighbors to the north in Canada. And, maybe we can start by just sort of setting the scene for this, because prior to Trump's inauguration, there was like a pretty clear expectation of how politics were going to go this year in Canada. Is that right?
Yeah, that is pretty much the case. The former Prime Minister now, Justin Trudeau, had dropped like a stone in popularity through a variety of domestic political scandals, foreign trips where he made missteps, old photos of him in black and brown face that had surfaced over the course of his almost 10-year tenure. Canadians were suffering from Justin fatigue. They wanted Justin to go. And as a result, the Liberal Party, of which he is a head, had followed him, sinking like a stone in public opinion. And it was pretty much conceded before the US election that the Liberal Party was going to lose. Conservative Party had surged ahead, was up by double digits, and the head of that party, Pierre Poilievre, would become the next prime minister. Lo and
Right.
behold, November 5th rolls around. The barrage of attacks on Canada by Donald Trump begins. Canadians are frankly blindsided that their best and truest ally that they've been faithful to since World War II, before and after, is stabbing them in the back.
And let me be clear on this, because during the campaign, there was really no indication of that the tariff wars, the trade wars would extend to Canada. There was some expectation
Yeah.
there was some expectation that there would be an attempt to rewrite the U.S. Mexico Canada agreement, which Donald Trump wrote, by the way, or
Yeah.
he was
Mhm.
president when it came through. And there's a review process for that, a 5 year review process, and there was an expectation that there would be some sort of review of that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I think to the extent that it happened very quickly. I think that was a bit of a blindside for
Yeah,
Canada.
there was a little bit of talk that Trump felt that Mexico and Canada needed a good talking to and whatnot, but I think it's safe to say that the extent of the um, backstabbing was totally unexpected.
Yeah,
Even along the states that voted for Trump, in the Mountain West in particular, there's been a lot of shock about how Trump has
yeah,
turned on Canada and threatened their sovereignty and levied these tariffs and taken them off and raised them
right.
and uh,
So, so
dropped them.
what did so what did Trudeau do? Because I think this is an important part of this. What did he do in the interregnum period, in the transition period? There was like a trip to Mar-a-Lago, and then there
Yeah,
was
Trump,
all of that.
I think Trudeau thought that he could get on Trump's good side by going down, kind of talking some sense. And, after you're
Yeah,
inaugurated, we will go to the table and work things out. There was a sense that some of this was to relitigate the USMCA, the North American Trade Agreement, but everything could be worked out.
right,
That was not the message that Trump gave to Trudeau. He's started with the sovereignty threats
right,
to Canada, the 51st state,
right,
jockeying that you talk about blowback in Canada. People were stunned by that. The invective levied on Trudeau, not addressing him by prime minister, labeling him a governor. All of that went over very badly in Canada. Trudeau goes back to Canada. Um, there is speculation that Trump, speculation that Trump
mhm,
expressed his distaste for one of uh, Trudeau's ministers, Chrystia Freeland, who was the deputy PM slash finance minister. He asked her
mhm,
to step aside to a lower portfolio. She declined and quit. That was the more than the Mar-a-Lago trip. That was the precipitating factor that basically the rest of his party, the rest of liberals in government and outside, deserted Trudeau, and he had no more. He had no more support. He had to announce that he was resigning because his support evaporated. That opened the
right,
door for Mark Carney, who has been a Trudeau um, advisor. Mark Carney, as we know, who is now officially the Prime Minister of Canada, has a very impressive resume from an international banking perspective. Former governor of the Bank of Canada, the only non-British person to head the Bank of England, which is
right,
astounding when you think that the Bank of England has been in existence for more than 3 centuries.
right,
Um, he's worked with Goldman Sachs.
right,
He has come home to be an advisor to the Liberal Party and is kind of operating in the shadows. But it
right,
became clear as the trade threats accelerated, and Mark Carney stepped out of the shadows, that he was the man, if you will. He was the person that Canadians, broadly speaking, saw as the answer. With his tremendous background, Canadians would remember him for his work during the Great Recession, keeping
right.
Canada afloat. The recession in Canada was not as severe as it
Mm,
was here in the United States because Canada had stronger banking regulations, never fell into
mm,
the prime type situation. Um, and Carney was steering the Canadian response to the Great Recession.
right.
So he has cred in Canada. the question, and that buoyed him at going
Well,
in.
but wait. So
Mm,
so so we have the liberals. I just want to go backtrack a little bit here.
sure.
So Trudeau resigned, and there's every expectation that in the next election, well, the conservatives is going to swing back to the conservative. And then with Trump's continued attacks, there's this sort of rally around the flag effect that takes
Mhm.
place in Canada, and the polls start to move. Now, why would Poilievre, who's the conservative candidate, why would he be harmed by this Trumpian trade war? Other than the fact that if it's rally around the flag, the current party in power is the Liberals.
Well, there is a belief that Poilievre will not be able to stand up to Trump, that he would
Mm-hmm.
become a Trump toady. Whatever Trump would ask
Got it.
him to do, that he would do it.
Tell me about him a little bit, like his
That is the
background.
fear. He is a member of parliament and has been in parliament for 20 years with a very lackluster record. He has not authored any major legislation and is not really seen as um, impressive at all as far as his parliamentary accomplishments are concerned.
Mm-hmm.
However, he is considered an excellent campaigner,
Mm-hmm.
very good on the campaign trail. He's Trump-like in his coming up with cute slogans. There is a carbon tax levied on consumers and businesses in Canada, Axe the tax he came up with. So he's into cute nicknames and what have you. So the fear among people who have been swayed into a very nationalist, very rally around the maple leaf position on this is that Polyev is going to sell us out.
Ah,
Okay.
got
So
it.
that is the fear among liberals and others who are wary of Polyev. There
So the
is
polls started to shift there. I mean, it was
That's
like
where the
this
polls
wasn't just
started.
sort of a sentiment. Like we're actually seeing this in the
Yeah, we're
polls.
actually seeing the fear manifest itself, at least at the polls. Now, being it's a parliamentary democracy and that Polyev is still very
Right.
popular amongst a certain segment of the Conservative Party,
Mm-hmm.
there is a possibility that he could pull off a minority government, that they
Right.
would still be in power. He'd have to seek alliances with the smaller parties, and we'd have to take it from there. So that is
Well,
is the setup now. That
yeah,
Polyev,
and the story, and let's move that into the story that you wrote that's on the site today, which really talks about Carney
mhm.
and his potential vulnerabilities. And you've made, I think, a very interesting and astute parallel here to Kamala Harris. Why don't you talk about that?
What is beginning to surface, and this is Carney's big problem. Obviously, Kamala Harris was, was held political office before she came um,
Mm-hmm.
to the White House as vice president, and as a skilled campaigner. Um, not Barack Obama, but still she knows what she's doing. Mark Carney has never held political office, no political office whatsoever. So there
Yeah.
is a
It's
concern
like if Jay Powell or Janet Yellen
yeah,
ran for president.
going on the campaign trail.
Right.
There's a concern that he will flub on the campaign trail. There's concern about how he will go over in Quebec. Um, Quebec has a significant reservoir of votes for the Liberal Party, so that's a problem. His French, which is very important in Canada, his French is not, it's okay, but it's not great,
Mm-hmm.
according to many sources. So
And he's
that's
going up against someone with a French surname who is
is not,
presumably, yeah.
as I understand it, I believe that he is not ethnically French, that French Canadian.
Polyev is not. Yeah, yeah.
Polyev, yeah. but his French is good. He is
Mhm.
he's fluent. Um, so that is something that I would have to circle back to you on. But his French is
Yeah.
fluent, and it's better than Carney's, and he's used to debating in French, where I
Mhm.
don't believe that Mark Carney um, is.
But
So
but
the
but you
problem,
also you
to get back
related it. I'm
to
sorry.
Kamala Harris for just a quick
Yeah,
second,
yeah,
is
yeah. That's what I was going to do.
that
So go ahead.
um, if he continues down the path of just talking about this as a wartime economy, we're at war, a trade war with the United States, and not
Yeah.
getting to the other economic issues
Right.
that are simmering under that, that is um, housing, and the cost of housing is a very big problem in Canada, similar to here, particularly
Yeah.
in the large metro areas, Vancouver, Montreal, Toronto. Um, and other price concerns that people are worried about, for example, and that's probably one of the biggest, that he could have some problems if he takes a kind of a saving. For the Democrats, it was saving democracy, which didn't ultimately resonate.
Right.
In Canada, it's too much trade war. If everything is trade war without getting to these other workaday issues, that could be a problem for him.
And the other thing is, there was a reason that Justin Trudeau, was disliked and his favorability dropped. And I mean, maybe part of that is personal, but part of it is what every industrialized nation has been going through in the last few years, which is the inflation that happened has been extremely, you know, unfavorable for incumbents. And ultimately, Mark Carney, whoever he is the representative of the party that was in power when that
Yeah.
inflation got into
And that's
play.
his other problem, is that he's linked to Trudeau.
Correct.
And
And he was like specifically an advisor to Trudeau.
he's an
So yeah.
advisor to Trudeau. And that was actually the conservative strategy. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Prior, that whoever became the liberal leader was going to be linked to Trudeau. The problem with that now is the trade war. That's where
Right.
Trudeau doesn't resonate as strongly. And also because Trudeau stepped up to the plate and really, in the interim, stepped up to the plate and hammered Trump, and then passed that along to
Right.
Carney. And the question is, can Carney be as effective as Trudeau was? Because as much as people dislike Trudeau, he's seen as standing up for Canada in a very effective way that
Right.
has actually gotten a lot of applause from people who dislike him.
So yeah, it's a little different than the dynamic with Harris, where she was leashed to a very unpopular president. And the president, there was some reporting that came out this week where the president was essentially stalking Harris, and his
Mhm.
aides were stalking Harris and saying, don't put any daylight between us.
Yeah.
Don't, you're not allowed to break with me. And that ultimately, the very famous situation on The View, where Harris said she couldn't think of one thing different that she would have done
Yeah, but don't
than.
forget that Carney will have to fend off the displeasure with Trudeau. That
Oh,
will come up
100%. I mean,
and
that's all the
be a
same.
factor. Yeah, that
That's
will be.
all the same. And Mark Carney is probably going to be asked the same question that Kamala Harris was asked on The View.
Yeah.
What difference would you have done than Justin Trudeau during this tenure? And it's going to be hard for someone who was literally advising Justin Trudeau during that tenure to answer that question.
Well,
But
the difference is he is now the prime minister, so he is not really worried about what
that is a difference.
Justin
Like it,
Trudeau
it's
thinks now. Justin Trudeau
Right.
can go
Like
off.
he can set that course, and he will have a record, however short, in the time before the election,
Exactly.
where Harris, Biden didn't step down, so Harris didn't have that ability.
Right. Exactly.
The difference here, of course, is Trump, and what's really fascinating about this is that what Trump has done in a very short period of time. We're talking about less,
Mhm.
I think, 55 days or something like that. in a very short period of time, Trump has set this sort of global populist right movement in reverse. Like he has taken the political economy of, if you will, of entire nations who were moving in one direction, and he's moved them in a different direction. And now we'll see what happens in
Well, the
Canada.
interesting thing about that is that this is where Carney actually has some political experience. As governor of the Bank of England,
Right,
he had to observe what was going on with Brexit and deal with characters like Boris Johnson, who, if
right.
you are have followed British politics, is a very divisive, blustering individual, similar to Trump in a lot of respects. And excuse me, um, he's had experience with that. I think dealing with Boris Johnson is good prep for dealing with Trump. And Carney also was right about Brexit. He saw the divisions in the UK over Brexit and warned that Brexit would not be good for the British economy. And he's turned out to be correct. So, if in dealing with personalities, I think dealing with British politicians, if you can deal with British politicians, particularly someone who is, as hard to deal with as Boris Johnson always has been, then I think to a certain degree you may be ready for the White House.
Well, it's going to be interesting, and as you point out, this isn't a presidential election. This is a parliamentary election. They haven't even found a place for Carney to run yet, but I assume they'll do that, and they'll find some
Hopefully
safe
they will
riding.
find some place for him
Yeah,
to win easily because that's what they
right,
need.
right. But it means that it's. I mean, there's an extent of this because of the electoral college in America, but uh, there's a sense in where this is at least in part about the quality of candidates and regional differences and regional peculiarities. So it's not fully one to one, but I think what's interesting is you know will you mentioned a minority government possibility. This could go one any of several different ways, right? Where maybe the conservatives break through and they win the election outright, maybe the liberals do, or maybe there's a split here and they have to sort of cobble something together.
Yeah, that is definitely all on the table at this point. Although the political experts in Canada have been talking about a minority government. It's all going to hinge on how apoplectic the Canadian electorate is, and
Right.
whether they see Mark Carney as the person to save Canada's sovereignty, if you will.
I mean,
Uh,
I gotta say, they're pretty apoplectic. I mean, I keep
Yeah, I
getting
think
fed,
Americans have no idea, generally speaking, and
well,
along the border, if you live along the northern
that's right.
border, those states, there have been the Atlantic premiers in Eastern Canada have come down to places like Maine to and try and impress upon Mainers that this is really a historic line that we cannot afford to fail in
Yeah.
this. That is, something has to be done to push back against this economic catastrophe. I think folks along the northern border of the United States get it in a
Yeah.
way that no
Well,
one else does.
my understanding is that trips across the border from Canada to the US, which are often done to buy goods, to buy various things, are down something like 23% over the last month.
Yeah. Trips,
Um,
vacations are down. Uh,
Vacations are down. Uh,
Alcohol's been taken off
you
the
know,
shelves.
I keep seeing hockey games where the U.S. national anthem is roundly booed.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of discontent and anger in Canada over this, and if it affects a national election, that's interesting. That's an event, and the question is, will we see that elsewhere? Because Canada is not the only place that Donald Trump is antagonizing, right? I think it's an interesting harbinger of what we could see elsewhere. Now, what is the timing here? The expectation of the time?
Well, there is an expectation Mark Carney was sworn in as prime minister this morning, and there's an
Oh,
expectation that he's going to call an election, quote unquote, very soon.
mm,
I saw some reporting that he might even do it today. That's,
mm,
speculation at this point. Have not seen anything on that, but he's going to call it very soon. Once he calls the election, he wants to do that. He wants to call the election before the 24th of March because the opposition parties, the Conservatives and the New Democrats, which is a left of center party, have threatened to bring down the government. So once
ah,
he calls an election, you go into a campaign period and you don't have to contend with that. And once the election is called, the expectation is that it will be held either by the end of April or the beginning of May.
I mean, that just the idea that you would call an election that just gets held in a month rather than our perpetual election cycle
Yeah.
here in the US
Yeah,
just
well, yeah.
sounds like such a pleasure.
But typically, election campaigns have been shorter in Canada because they have a finite amount of time to set the election. Um,
It's
uh,
just great.
they just have to
I
do
wish
that,
I wish we had that.
and Trudeau actually benefited. I believe his first election, the prime minister, the conservative prime minister Stephen Harper, decided he wanted to have a longer campaign season, thinking that would benefit him. It
Mm,
did. It didn't. It
mm,
just gave Trudeau, who was who was new to the scene, it gave him more time to kind of solidify his position, and Harper lost. So the
interesting.
Liberals have taken this up to say, sure, it is better.
Right.
Let's call
But
the
that
election.
only gives a limited amount of time for Carney to prove himself in the job, right? I mean,
Yes, it also gives him a limited amount of time to make mistakes.
but also to introduce himself to the public. So, I mean, there are pros and cons, I guess. But
There are pros
we'll
and
see
cons.
what happens. We'll
Hmm.
see what happens. We got about 10 minutes left, and I think I want to talk about one other thing with you that you've written about, and that's federal workers.
Hmm.
Obviously, we'll see what the outcome of this lawsuit is, but I think it's pretty clear that there are going to be fewer federal workers in DC and throughout the country than there were prior to Donald Trump's inauguration. And I think one interesting development that you've written about that speaks to something we don't always see in the Democratic Party, which is capitalizing on opportunities, is this effort to recruit federal workers for state and even municipal jobs. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, a lot of states have put out calls, particularly Maryland. I understand Massachusetts is doing now, Hawaii, Alaska, to recruit federal workers for their for state jobs. States like Maryland actually have been having trouble recruiting
Mm-hmm.
state workers. And so they see this as an opportunity to get some very skilled people into the ranks of state government and boost not only their, the knowledge quotient,
Mm-hmm.
um, but fill jobs that have gone by the wayside. Uh, Obviously, there aren't enough state jobs to sweep up all the folks who have been tossed out, but it is a harbinger of how states can improve the quality of their various agencies by recruiting these federal workers. And I'm sure the federal workers will see this as, if not a permanent move, as at least a transition for them. State jobs typically do not pay as well
Hmm.
as federal jobs. Obviously, a lot of
Hmm.
federal workers are going to consider going into the private sector, where they can be paid for their paid very handsomely for their expertise. So you will see that as well. But the states are smart to be putting out these calls for, to come and work for us. Maryland again has Governor Wes Moore has even gone ahead and said we need to reduce the time it takes to bring people on board. And other
Hmm.
states like Hawaii, where apparently it takes a very, very long period of time to bring new workers into the fold, has also looked into cutting down
Hmm.
um, on the time it takes to bring people on. Making it easier for people to get unemployment insurance from their respective municipalities. So it's definitely something that states are looking at to boost their own ranks and agencies. And of course, the private sector is going to be looking at it too. There is a very famous revolving door between different agencies and the private sector. I used to work for the federal government, and my agency, Export Administration at the U.S. Department of Commerce, was a constant revolving door of
Yeah.
people who were counselors. I was a counselor in an export administration office, between that
Mhm.
office and private jobs, with companies who are looking for people to run their export administration programs.
Yeah. I
So
mean,
you have back and forth.
I think one thing's really important to recognize is that people who go to work in federal jobs, they're probably leaving money on the table. I mean,
You're not
if
doing
you
it. You don't work for the federal government for the money.
right,
Um,
I mean, the comparable jobs in the private sector pay more.
mhm.
That's even true all the way up to representatives, frankly, and
Oh,
their
mhm.
staffs. If you want less corruption in government, pay the workers better because then they won't be tempted to, to to do the kinds of things they do. So you really have to be dedicated, and you really have to believe in public service, and that makes those people just really prime candidates for state government if you can get them. And
Well,
this is a situation
yeah,
where you may be able to do that.
that's kind of the tragedy of all of this turmoil, is that the notion that federal workers are corrupt by definition has taken hold,
Yeah.
whereas the lion's share of the federal workforce are like any other sector. People are getting up every day to go into work, to do their jobs. They're not looking for personal enrichment. They're not looking to make life difficult for individual Americans. They're helping you, the American taxpayer, try and find your way around this huge bureaucracy.
Yeah.
For the most part, of course, there are people who are slackers. There's slackers. There are
but
slackers in
but
every
sure,
sector. But the
sure.
lion's share, if you've ever dealt with foreign bureaucracies in other countries, you will come home to the United States and walk up to any agency and just bow down,
Right.
because at least the federal government tries to assist folks to make sense of that maze.
They're not hiring a bunch of surly people. But
Oh,
I
there's
mean,
still people everywhere.
I have had occasion now the last 2 months in reporting to interact with dozens of federal workers, and they're all extremely helpful, extremely dedicated. Their main message is, I don't want this to be happening. Like I loved my job. I really wanted to continue in my job, and the stories that have come out are really heartbreaking. So
Very
I think it's a
hard.
good thing that states like New York, I mean, you see the billboards in Union Station, like if you were fired, you can be hired
In
with us.
Washington, yeah, and in
In
New York.
Washington. I think it's a smart tactic because you're going to get a really bolstered talent pool for state workforces, which are also often understaffed and underpaid and lacking.
Well, this will come home to Americans as we gear up for the summer season. You
Mm-hmm.
have National Park Service rangers who are not going to be around,
Mm-hmm.
which means parks are going to be closed down. Can you
Yep.
sneak into the parks? I mean,
Yep.
you're not going to have the resources and the services that you expect if you are traveling around the United States and want to visit various properties that are managed by the federal government. I mean,
100%.
think about it. Is Independence Hall in Philadelphia going to be closed?
Right. I
You
mean, the
know,
national
or
parks are one sort of important consumer facing node here. The other one is the Social Security Administration offices.
Social Security.
10,000 people a day become eligible for Social Security with baby boomers retiring. And 1 in 5 federal buildings are Social Security field offices.
Mhm.
And those people, the cuts that are expected there, anywhere from 12% to maybe as high as 50%, what I've heard, that's going to be absolutely devastating for people to access the benefits that they've earned.
And think
And
about
there
it
are
with
other,
taxes. You're waiting for
the
your
IRS is
IRS
another big one.
refund if you're going to get one. Uh, already seen people. Oh, where is my refund?
Right.
That sort of
Waiting
thing.
months for the refunds,
Reading
waiting for customer service
exactly.
at the IRS. It's really damaging and devastating. I think it's driving in some ways, even now, driving some of this negative consumer sentiment, and that will only grow.
Right, and driving what's going on at these town halls. Obviously, I
Right.
mean, you mentioned this at the top with the veterans. It's
Yes.
absolutely criminal what's going
Yeah.
on with
And
veterans,
that's another
their
key.
services.
It's
It's
another key consumer
impactful.
facing area, which is
Mhm.
healthcare for veterans at the VAs
Veterans.
across the country. And we've written a lot about that. Suzanne Gordon
It's
does some
Suzanne Gordon,
incredible work on
exactly,
our
and Steve
site,
Gurley. Yeah,
and Steve
exactly.
Early, her co-writer. All
It's
right.
it's just amazing that this administration can turn around and basically give the back of their hand to veterans. But if you think about it, the the president has always been dismissive of veterans. All you have to look at as comments he's made
Right.
about, you know, the
And this
late
is when,
Senator John McCain. I mean,
right,
think about what you will of John McCain. Anyone who survived the Hanoi Hilton
yeah.
um, deserve some respect, as do all the veterans who've been um, prisoners of war, who have been in battle, and who have come home wounded both physically and psychologically by their service. The country owes it to them to be cared for.
And just
And
briefly, it's not just veterans programs, but 30% of all federal employees are veterans.
yeah,
It's a
you
high
know,
disproportionate number. And in fact, there are
it's
programs to hire veterans into federal employment. So
exactly.
it's a double blow there. All right. Thank you, Gabrielle. We're out of time now, but Gabrielle Gurley is the senior editor. You can catch her columns every week at the Prospect,
And today.
and we will and online.
Mhm.
And we will be back every week, this time, 12:30 Eastern. We will post this conversation up on the website, so check for that. And thank you for being with us today, and have a great weekend.